You've got 24 hours to get out of this neighborhood, old man. The gang leader stood in the doorway of the small apartment, his crew behind him radiating menace. We know you've been talking to the cops, telling them about our business. That makes you a problem. The older man sitting calmly at his kitchen table didn't even look up from his newspaper. And we solve problems permanently around here, the gangster continued, pulling back his jacket to show the gun tucked in his waistband. 24 hours or we solve the problem for you. Still no reaction from the man at the table. The gang leader's voice rose with frustration. Hey, are you listening to me? Finally, the older man looked up and something in his eyes made the gangster take an involuntary step back. I heard you, Colonel David Iceman Parker said quietly. What this street punk didn't realize was that he'd just threatened a man who'd spent 30 years in Delta Force, who'd conducted surgical strikes against terrorist cells, and survived classified operations that would remain secret for decades. And Iceman was about to demonstrate why real operators earn their reputations in silence. 3 months earlier, Colonel David Parker was trying to spend the first year of his retirement quietly. After a 30-year military career, all he wanted was peace. He'd rented a small apartment in this old neighborhood where he'd grown up as a child, spending his days reading books, taking walks, and playing chess at the local coffee shop. His neighbors knew him only as Mr. Parker, polite, quiet, a man who kept to himself. Nobody knew he was one of Delta Force's most elite operators, that he'd completed the most dangerous missions worldwide. But the neighborhood was changing. First came the graffiti, then the sounds of breaking glass. His elderly neighbors were now afraid to go out in the evenings. Small shops were being forced to pay protection money. The Crimson Serpents gang had taken over the area. Their leader was Marcus Viper Rodriguez, 28 years old, who'd returned to the neighborhood after 5 years in prison and decided to build his own kingdom. His 30-member gang was young, hungry, and ruthless when it came to violence. David watched quietly. Old habits died hard. Situational assessment, threat analysis, escape routes. These were automatic processes. Grandma, pay your protection money on time this time. Tommy, Viper's right-hand man, shouted at 75-year-old Mrs. Rodriguez, ironically sharing the same last name as the gang leader. The boss is getting impatient. David watched the scene from the coffee shop window. The elderly woman clutched her shopping bags tightly, nodding with fear in her eyes. $200 every week, Tommy continued, or your shop windows might get broken. You understand? This was too much. A war began inside David between his military discipline and his civilian identity. For 30 years, he'd been trained to protect innocent people. But he wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just a retiree. That night, the former Delta Force operator called the local police station for the first time. Gang activity? The officer on the phone sounded tired. Mr. Parker, you're the third person to file this complaint this week. We're aware of the situation, but we don't have enough evidence right now. Evidence? They're openly collecting extortion money. Unfortunately, witness statements aren't enough. These gangs have lawyers. We need solid proof. David hung up the phone and looked out the window. 5 gang members stood on the street corner as if standing guard on their own territory. The next morning, Viper himself was at David's door. The gang leader had come alone, a show of confidence. Mr. Parker, right? Viper smiled, but his eyes were cold. You're new to the neighborhood. 3 months now, David replied calmly. Nice place, safe. But safety isn't free. Viper looked around. $200 monthly protection fee. Reasonable price. David studied him quietly. Size, weight, physical condition, whether he was carrying weapons, automatic assessment. Protection fee, David repeated slowly. Yeah. The price you pay to live in this neighborhood. Otherwise, bad things can happen. Bad things? Viper's patience snapped. Listen, old man, this ain't child's play. Either you pay up or you deal with the consequences. David slowly closed the door. In the following weeks, David didn't pay the protection money. The punishments came gradually. First week, his car was scratched. Second week, his mailbox was destroyed. Third week, His window was broken with a rock, but David did nothing. He just observed, took notes, studied patterns. His neighbors were worried. "Mr. Parker, you should pay them," Mrs. Chen whispered. "You don't know what this gang is capable of." But David did know. He knew what real threats were. And these were child's play. For 30 years, he dealt with actual terrorists, Al-Qaeda operatives, ISIS militants, professional assassins. This street gang was amateur compared to them. David quietly began studying the gang. Old habits, surveillance, pattern analysis, weakness identification. The Crimson Serpent structure was simple. Viper, leader, 28 years old, prior crimes, drug dealing, armed robbery. Tommy, right hand, 25 years old, violent crimes. Carlos, enforcer, 30 years old, most dangerous member, 27 other members, mostly aged 16 to 24, operation center. Old auto repair shop on the edge of the neighborhood. Weapons cache, basement of the repair shop. Shift schedule, morning 6 to 14, evening 14 to 22, night 22 to 6. Weak point, Viper's ego and control obsession. After 3 months of attention-getting campaign, Viper was finally ready for his big move. He came to David's door with a 5-man team. "All right, old man, playtime's over," Viper shouted before the door opened. "This is the last time." When David opened the door, he faced 6 armed gang members. "We're coming in," Viper announced and pushed past David into the apartment. In the small living room, David's minimalism surprised Viper. Minimal furniture, books, no valuable items visible. "Sit down," Viper ordered. David sat in his chair at the kitchen table. He held his newspaper in his hands. "Now listen to me, old man." Viper approached the table. "We run this neighborhood, every house, every shop, every corner, and you're not recognizing our rules." David continued, looking at his newspaper. "Hey," Viper shouted, "I'm talking to you." "I hear you." "Good, because now you have 2 choices." Viper pulled out his gun but didn't point it yet. "Either you're going to pay $1,000, including 3 months of late fees, or it won't be possible for you to stay in this neighborhood." David finally folded his newspaper and placed it on the table. When he raised his head, everyone in the room felt the change in his eyes. Silence. "Which unit were you in?" Viper was confused. "What?" "In the military. Which unit did you serve in?" I wasn't in the military." David slowly stood up. His posture had changed. His shoulders had straightened. His eyes focused differently. "Do you know anyone who's seen real combat?" "What's that got to do with anything?" "I'm curious." David took a step forward. "Because real warriors behave differently. They don't raise their voices. They don't make threats. They don't show off." Viper's men tensed. Something had changed, but they couldn't understand what. "Real warriors," David continued, "just act." "Who do you think you are?" Viper raised his weapon. "Colonel David Parker, 30 years Delta Force, 12 deployments, 3 different war zones, classified operations, terrorist elimination, hostage rescue." The atmosphere in the room froze. "And you," David looked at the group, "are an amateur street gang." Viper pointed his gun, but David was already in motion. 30 years of training kicked in. He grabbed Viper's wrist, directed the weapon upward, drove his knee into his stomach. Within 2 seconds, the gang leader was on the ground, breathless. Tommy reached for his gun, but David's elbow met his jaw. Carlos attacked from behind, but David turned sideways and drove his foot into Carlos's knee. 5 seconds, 6 armed gang members, 3 on the ground. The remaining 3 froze, their weapons pointed at David, but they didn't dare fire, because David wasn't moving. He was just waiting. "Real operators," David spoke calmly. "Don't panic. They have plans." Viper was groaning on the ground. "I'm gonna kill you." "No," David looked at him, "because now I'm going to make you a real offer." David returned to his table and opened a drawer. The gang members tensed, but David only pulled out a file. "Do you know what's in this file?" He placed the file on the table. 3 months of intelligence about you." Viper tried to get up. "What?" "Marcus Rodriguez, born 1995, criminal record." David flipped through pages. Tommy Martinez, Carlos Vega, each of your addresses, families, routines. The gang members' faces paled. The weapons cache in the auto repair shop, drug routes, financial records, suppliers. David closed the file. Everything. Impossible. Did you think I was just sitting around for 3 months? David smiled. I collected intelligence for 30 years. You are visible targets. Viper angrily raised his gun. Then I'll kill you right now. There are copies of this file. David remained calm. Going to FBI, DEA, ATF, but only if something happens to me. Silence. Now I'm offering you a real deal. There are 847 people living in this neighborhood, David began. 312 of them are over 65. 156 are under 18. Average income is $32,000 per year. The gang members listened in amazement. And you're collecting protection money from them, about $30,000 per month. What do you want? Viper gritted his teeth. For you to leave this neighborhood completely. Never. Then we implement the alternative plan. David reopened the file. Tonight at 2300 hours, coordinated police raid. A TF will hit the weapons cache. DEA will shut down drug routes. FBI will arrest the leadership structure. Viper's face reddened. You're bluffing. David pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Agent Morrison? Parker here, waiting for confirmation for go, no go. Before hanging up. Yes, targets are still at location. Roger that. 22:30 hours, David continued. Exactly, because federal operations require precision. Viper was panicking. Wait, let's talk. Talk time is over. Action time. What do you want? David stood and walked to the window. 847 civilians live in this neighborhood. I swore an oath to protect them. You're terrorizing them. This is unacceptable. Okay, we can stop the protection money. Not sufficient. Viper was desperate. Then what do you want? David turned to him. Complete withdrawal. No activity in this neighborhood or neighboring areas. Total shutdown. Impossible! This is our territory. Territory? David smiled. Kid, I've seen real territorial wars. Fallujah, Kandahar, Mosul. You're just playing on street corners. David took a photograph from his table and handed it to Viper. What's this? Viper looked. Afghanistan, 2018. Our team securing a Taliban compound. The photo showed David in full combat gear with burned structures in the background. Do you see that man? David pointed to another soldier in the photo. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Do you know anything about him? Viper's expression changed. Rodriguez? Yes, Marcus Rodriguez's uncle, your relative? Viper's world shook. My uncle was KIA in Afghanistan. No, David said quietly. He died next to me, died in my arms. His last words were about his family. The gang leader closed his eyes. And now his nephew, someone carrying his name, is terrorizing the people his uncle tried to protect. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, David continued, do you know what he said with his last breath? Viper couldn't answer. Keep my family safe. That was his dying wish. And family doesn't just mean blood relatives. Family means community. David took back the photograph. Your uncle died for Mrs. Rodriguez, who lives in this neighborhood. The elderly woman you're terrorizing. Tears streamed from Viper's eyes. Military honor, David spoke softly, means service over self, sacrifice for others, protection of innocence. I didn't know? Now you do. David returned to his table and pulled out another file. What's this? Viper asked. Job opportunities, legitimate ones. David opened the file. Construction companies, security firms, trucking businesses, all hiring veterans' families. You have leadership skills. David looked at Viper. Organizational ability, people management. These are valuable in legitimate business. But easy money comes from drug dealing and extortion. I understand. David nodded. Short-term thinking. I'm offering you long-term strategy. David pulled out a form. GI Bill benefits. Even if you don't have military service, you're a veteran family member. You can benefit from your uncle's benefits. Viper looked at the form. College education, technical training, legitimate career paths. What about my gang? Transform it, turn it into a security company, legal protection services, legitimate business. David pulled out more documents. There are federal contracts, government buildings, corporate offices need security. Ex-military background is an advantage. 22:30 hours. David looked at his watch. 45 minutes. To make a decision. Not to decide, to implement. David walked to the window. Because you've already decided. How so? You came here with 6 people, but you didn't kill anyone. David turned to him. Real criminals don't leave witnesses. You still respect rules of engagement. Viper was surprised. What did your uncle teach you? David asked. That the strong should protect the weak. And what are you doing? Viper lowered his head. Terrorizing the weak. Because it's easy. Because it's quick money, but it's not honorable. David returned to his table and picked up the phone. Agent Morrison? Parker here. Stand down. Repeat, stand down. He hung up and looked at Viper. Operation canceled. Why? Viper asked. Because you're your uncle's nephew, and he was a good man. David pulled out a military challenge coin from his drawer and handed it to Viper. What is this? Your uncle's challenge coin. I took it when he died. To give to you. Viper's hands trembled as he took the coin. 75th Ranger Regiment, David explained. Your uncle's unit. Honor, courage, integrity. I don't deserve this. Not yet, David agreed, but you can. David showed the security company documents. Parker Security Consulting. I'll establish it. You'll manage it. Are you serious? Military precision, legitimate business, community protection. David outlined the plan. We'll hire ex-gang members, give them real training, provide legitimate security for the neighborhood. 6 months later, the Crimson Serpents no longer existed. In their place was Parker Security Consulting. Viper, now known as Marcus Rodriguez, was a legitimate business owner. He was studying criminal justice in college while managing the company. Former gang members were now licensed security guards. They'd received real training, passed background checks, and had legal authority. The neighborhood had changed. Crime rate had dropped 78%. Property values had increased. Elderly people were taking evening walks again. Mrs. Rodriguez's shop was thriving. No more protection money, just legitimate customers. And David Parker, retired colonel, was finally living his peaceful retirement. A year later, David was playing chess at the coffee shop when Marcus came in. Colonel Parker? Marcus, David looked up. How's college going? Good. 3.8 GPA. Marcus was proud. And the company is growing. We got 5 new contracts. Good. Marcus pulled out the challenge coin. I still carry this. Good. Your uncle would be proud. Marcus sat down. I want to ask you something. Ask. That night, was the FBI operation really ready? David smiled. Who do you think Agent Morrison is? I don't know. My former teammate, he's with FBI now. David moved a chess piece. But the operation, no, I improvised in the moment. Marcus was surprised. It was a bluff? Partially. But the file was real. The intelligence was real. And the threat was real. David looked at him. Only the timing was flexible. What about the security company idea? That was real too. I was already planning it. Marcus was confused. Why? Why did you take such a risk for a stranger? David looked out the window, where a security guard stood in front of Mrs. Rodriguez's shop, former gang member Tommy, now a licensed guard. Because, David turned to Marcus, I grew up in this neighborhood, 45 years ago. There were gangs then too, and nobody stopped them. And you decided to be different. No, David shook his head. I had taken an oath, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Retirement doesn't cancel the oath. 2 years later, Parker Security Consulting had become one of the city's most respected security firms. Marcus had finished his criminal justice degree and applied to the FBI Academy. Former Crimson Serpents members were now living different lives. Tommy at Police Academy, Peru. In EMT training, others, college, trade schools, legitimate jobs, The neighborhood had become a model. Officials from other cities came to study the Parker model, and David Parker, 67-year-old retired colonel, had finally found true peace. Because the mission wasn't just completed, a legacy had been established. Military honor applied in civilian life too. Service never ends. Real power doesn't show off. Real leadership doesn't threaten. And real courage is used for community protection, not personal gain. Colonel David Iceman Parker had learned this in 30 years of military service, and he taught it to Marcus Rodriguez. Sometimes the greatest victory is turning an enemy into an ally. Sometimes the real mission starts after you think it's over.